The Ergohuman Gen 1 was one of the first mesh office chairs to actually give the Herman Miller Aeron Classic a run for its money. It was also the reason that BTOT was able to go from a crazy idea I had in college to a real business. And this was mostly due to the fact that Office Depot decided to showcase the Ergohuman chair in their showrooms. With people flooding the internet looking for better deals, this grew our sales from thousands of dollars to over $1 million within the first calendar year of going live. But something else happened in that time period. I stopped liking the chair and wasn't able to sit in it for extended periods again for specific reasons like the front edge of the seat pan and the contour of the back of the seat. Now the Gen 1 did have other flaws that I could live with, but the seat made it unbearable for me. I've now been sitting in the Gen 2 for a month, which in itself is a major accomplishment. So did the Gen 2 solve all of the Generation 1 issues? Let's find out. The design changes on the Ergohuman Gen 2 are subtle, but I believe they're significant enough to really bring this chair back to life as a high-end alternative to the Aeron. From the improvement in the mechanism design and seat to the change within the backrest, removing that torture device spine and replacing it with a sleeker integrated tension mechanism in the backrest, the polished aluminum that goes up the backrest through the headrest really makes this new design stand out. When the Ergohuman was first released in the early 2000s, the overall build quality was actually very good. Now we've sold well over 10,000 of these in the last 17 years, and many of our original customers are still using their original chair today. Now some have had to replace a caster, cylinder, or arm pad, but otherwise they've really held up quite well. With that said though, there were definitely things about the Generation 1 that I didn't love, and this includes the removal of that cheap plastic mechanism cover. This has always stood out to me. The Gen 2 has made significant changes to the mechanism, going with a sleek mechanism that's encased in polished aluminum. It feels and looks solid. The frame on the Ergohuman Generation 2 is even better than its predecessor though. While it might not be quite to the standard of an Aeron, it really isn't expected to be at half the price. And for around that $900 price point, I think most will be more than happy with the construction of the frame. The quality of the mesh on any chairs will ultimately decide how good it really can be. The Gen 1 chair was a significant upgrade over all chairs not named Aeron in its time, but it definitely had room for improvement. The change to the Gen 2 mesh was one of the most noticeable things while using the chair. First, switching from a stapling process to a slot fixing that's similar to the Aeron allowed the Ergohuman to precisely create a 12-zone mesh support with their T168 mesh material. The new mesh material used was upgraded in how it was actually produced. Increasing the amount of yarn with both types of mesh allowed for better tension and elasticity. This change led to an increase in overall support, prevention of sagging from long-term usage, and created a more comfortable experience all around. The recline feature on the Ergohuman Generation is pretty incredible. Now, everyone is trying to mimic that harmonic tilt feature on the Aeron, and while I don't think the Ergohuman is quite there, it's still very smooth overall when moving from that upright position to a recline position, making rocking back and forth actually achievable. Second, a change in the actual positioning of the arms and how they attach to the mechanism eliminated the awkward gap that naturally formed as you reclined in your chair. Another major change was in the backrest design of the Generation 2 Ergohuman. Now, while the backrest was one of the better features on the first iteration of this chair, there was still plenty of room for improvement here, and the three most major concerns I had were addressed. First, just getting the backrest to feel like it positioned you in a more upright position with proper support throughout your entire back was the breakthrough that I needed. In making this change, they also eliminated the headrest getting in the way and preventing you from proper support through your upper back. Most of this was actually done through minor design changes in the shape of the backrest frame and the flex zones in the mesh itself. This design change repositioned the mesh, hitting your upper back sooner and allowing the headrest to move more in line with the upper backrest. This change also allowed Ergohuman to remove the foam that was found in the back of the lumbar support that you could actually feel as you push back into the chair. Secondly, the lumbar support on the Ergohuman had always been a polarizing subject. Because it was so strong, not everyone necessarily loved it. The tension system that was built into the original Ergohuman had zero adjustment to it. You basically needed to adapt to it. The Gen 2 introduced an adjustable tension system with a huge range that takes consideration of the user's weight and preference for how strong they want the support to be. They also provided more of a height adjustment range on the backrest, moving from 4 preset height positions to 6, and actually changed the way the adjustments can be made, moving from a dual lever system to a ratchet height adjustment system. Now this does provide even more customization on how tall the back is and where the actual lumbar support hits your back. The Gen 2 headrest didn't just see an improvement of where it was positioned. The new mesh material used on this iteration of the chair is softer and honestly feels better on your neck and head. They've also done a better job of how the height adjustment works itself. Where the Gen 1 moved a bit too easily, this one actually locks in place much better. Now the pivot feature on the Gen 2 is a bit similar to the Gen 1, and I would say it's probably still too easy to move, even though it's noticeably better than the Gen 1. Over the course of 17 years, Ergohuman has slowly been improving their armrest pads and design. Their latest change in design with the Gen 2 though is by far their best. For the first time, they've actually introduced a width adjustment, which is very important to getting the fit right for different body types. This is a nice upgrade. I would just actually like to see the range be increased another 50% here. Ergohuman also increased the pivot adjustment range on the Generation 2, making it feel closer to the gesture with regards to support with use of a cell phone or tablet. In fact, the pivot range on this is actually quite a bit more significant than the gesture, and when paired with the massive height adjustment range, it allows for excellent support with these types of devices, especially when you're using it in full recline. I have to say, I honestly love this feature and I didn't expect to. If you're a soft arm pad lover, well, now's the time to rejoice. One of the most frequent comments I heard when I rolled this chair around the office for others to try was just how soft the arm pads were. They're probably the closest thing I've actually felt to the Aeron's newest arm pads. Was this intentional? Well, probably, because considering the Ergohuman Gen 1 was first introduced to compete directly with the Aeron, it makes sense that they would be trying to mimic it in some ways. Now, I'd have a hard time not ranking the Ergohuman Gen 2 arm pads themselves in an S tier. They're that good. The part in this review that I'm sure all of you have been waiting for is seat comfort. And let's be honest, this is the hardest part to get right with any mesh office chair. I'd have to say though, the seat is where I believe most of the change was needed on the Ergohuman, and they delivered. As mentioned earlier in the build quality section, there was a big change to the mesh material used and how they attached it to the chair. This material change provided better elasticity for longer term durability, and 4 specific zones within the mesh material for the seat specifically, creating a much improved sitting experience over the Generation 1. This improvement with the new mesh couldn't have been realized without a change to the actual seat frame design though. One of the first things I noticed was that Ergohuman actually removed the front seat pad, and this is very similar to what Aeron did with the remastered chair. This definitely helps to reduce the pressure that's felt in the back of your legs that's typically built up with these pads on mesh seats. Additionally, the rest of the seat frame went to a more flat design throughout. This was especially noticeable when you put the chairs side by side. This more curved design on the original Ergohuman definitely created some awkward pressure points while seated for longer periods. The flatter design on the Gen 2, paired with that new waterfall front that removes the foam padding, was just what the chair needed. During my longer sitting periods, I feel that the weight distribution across this mesh is what allows me to work comfortably for hours without any tailbone issues. Finding a good all-mesh alternative to the Aeron isn't an easy task, with the Cosm only being the really viable alternative that's still the same amount of money from Herman Miller. The Ergohuman brings a viable alternative for many of you who have a budget that's under $1,000, but still want that breathability and support that mesh can provide. Because the Ergohuman has height-adjustable backrest and a seat slider, true customization to fit your actual body type exists within the Ergohuman. Pair that with a headrest that's actually comfortable, and I believe the Ergohuman has a real chance to compete with the Herman Miller Aeron Remastered again.